Welcome back. Lori Horton joins us in the studio this morning to teach us how to make her toasted pecan cookies. Lori, good morning.
Good morning.
To me about, we're already working hard.
I know, we got to jump right in this morning, you know, it's just going to be that kind of day. But what I'm doing over here is I wanted to get a little head start on toasting the pecans because it's obviously a very important ingredient in these cookies. It's right there in the title. And it's going to take just a couple minutes over a medium to high heat. And this has just got a little bit of melted butter, a couple tablespoons, and about 1.5 cups of some chopped pecans. And they're not super finely chopped, they're just kind of pieces. You know, do that as big or small as you like. But we want to sit here and just really let them toast, and you need to stir this constantly. You need to be turning that melted butter, making sure those pecans are getting coated. You could actually do it in a little more of a small saucepan as well, or a little skillet if that's what you've got. Just something to kind of keep them moving. You don't want to scorch the butter, but you are going to get that
now,
extra
do you want to
flavor.
put the butter and the pecans in all at once, or do you want to do that differently?
I melted the butter first,
so
that it made it just a little bit easier to kind of toss over the pecans. So it's really preference. It doesn't totally matter, but just make sure that you're constantly keeping those pecans moving because we'll get a good toasty nutty flavor. But if you just, I know, right? It's filling up already. But if you just sort of walk away and let those set, you're going to get some scorched ones on the bottom. So we don't want to taste that burnt butter flavor in there. These cookies are a little bit unique in some of the ingredients. Nothing out of the ordinary, but we make a really chewy, almost cakey type cookie.
Delicious.
But yet it still has that crisp bottom that everybody likes, those crisp edges. And the way that we do that is we incorporate all 3 of our leavening ingredients that we don't usually put in a cookie dough recipe. This is going to have baking soda, baking powder, and a little bit of cornstarch.
So how does that work out if we don't normally use it?
Usually we kind of go with one or the other, sometimes 2. But the point of that is with our baking powder and our baking soda, those leaveners give us lift and rise. So they make them bake up a little bit, but they still give a crisp edge. The cornstarch jumps in there and it still keeps them nice and chewy in the middle. It almost is the equivalent of when you add it to all-purpose flour. It almost becomes like a cake flour.
Interesting.
So it's just a little bit different, but it makes them such a good texture that you want to make sure that you really follow that recipe very precisely because it's different amounts of each. It's kind of odd. And I was making these yesterday. It'd been a very long day and I started to add the wrong amount of one. I caught myself in the nick of time, but you want to be very careful with that and make sure that you're getting the amounts in there correctly because they react against the acid in the brown sugar. And again, very important when we draw that line between baking and cooking. Baking is that science that is so important that we follow. So these are just about toasted up and ready to use. And when we come back, we're going to get all of those ingredients combined, make that yummy dough, and talk about how we bake these off to get that great texture. So totally worth it.
It smells and looks wonderful, so you definitely don't want to miss it, Lori. Thanks. Stick around. We'll be right back. Well, this morning, Lori Horton has been showing us her recipe for toasted pecan cookies. Now, we've done a lot of work already, and we talked about some important ingredients. So what's next, Lori?
Next up is just to put all those things together and make this really yummy dough. It's one that you'll have a hard time kind of staying out of before you put it in the oven, I promise. Although we all know we're not supposed to do that, you know, with the eggs. So we started out with toasting those pecans. And so what I've got now is just a nice little pan. I can get up here high enough you guys can see. Of those. They're slightly browned butter. Those went for about 3 to 4 minutes on a medium to high heat, just constantly turning those pecans, getting that toastiness, that butter kind of warmed into them. So the next thing we're going to do is, again, very simple ingredients. We're going to start with some brown sugar. You could probably hear that thunk in there. It's nicely packed, so be sure you do that when you measure. And you can use light or dark brown sugar for this recipe. It's just your preference. If you really love that warm, sort of almost molassesy more flavor to it, go with the dark. But you can really use either one. I had light extra, so that's what I used today. I'm just whisking together a little bit my white and dark sugar so that those lumps are kind of out of that packed brown sugar. And to that, I'm just going to add some butter. What's a little bit odd is we melted the butter, but then we let it cool.
Okay.
So it's not clear. It's hard to see in that white bowl on there, I know, but it is still very soft and pourable, but it's not that clear, very liquid melted butter. So just kind of back to a quick room temperature.
Okay.
Kind of do that when you first start.
Sure.
And set it aside.
Yes.
And by the time you're ready for it, it'll be good to
wonderful.
go. That's one that you just don't want it warm.
Right.
So we're going to mix that in with our sugars. I'm going to go back to my whisk here in just a second, but I want to make sure I get that bottom scraped well and get all those dry ingredients. And then to that, we're going to add some eggs, some vanilla, pretty standard. And this is going to be very thin to start with because, of course, we haven't added any dry ingredients yet. Get those lumps out of there. You could do this with a hand mixer, but you really don't need to.
No, especially with that butter the way that it is, it blends nicely.
It goes together so quickly, so there's just no need to dirty those extra tools. We're going to add those couple eggs, break up the yolks, get them in as well, and then just a little splash of vanilla, because that just makes everything better.
Certainly does.
And really make sure that that is well incorporated before we get to the dry ingredients. But the last thing we're going to add is just our flour and mixture of those baking powder, baking soda, cornstarch, and of course a little dash of salt that we talked about in the last segment. Very important to get the correct ratios on that, because that's going to be what makes this cookie so nice and crisp edged, lightly browned, and yet still really soft and tender in the middle. So we'll slowly start to put these together, and then we come back, we'll prep them for baking.
All right, sounds wonderful. Lori, thanks. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Lori has been showing us her recipe for toasted pecan cookies. Now we're working on making our cookie dough. So what's left?
So good. I've got all of those. We mixed all those wet ingredients together really thoroughly, and then just added in those dry ingredients. So right now what we've got is a very nice sticky dough. And the last thing I'm going to add, of course, is those toasted pecans. But you really want to save them for the end, and don't overmix. Just fold them in.
Do they need to be cooled down before?
It's best if they are cooled. Again, if you just do kind of melt your butter first, set it aside, work on those pecans, then by the time you get all this done, those are going to be plenty cooled enough to go ahead and use. Just kind of think about your steps when you do that a little bit, and you save yourself a lot of time waiting. But we just want to fold those in, make sure they're thoroughly incorporated. And then one of the next most important steps on this dough is to chill it. Because obviously it is a very sticky dough. It doesn't even really hold my spatula up well, so it's a very soft dough. But we need to make sure that it chills so it'll hold its shape. And I've got some that's been in the fridge overnight, at least an hour.
What would you say is best?
You know, the ones that I baked yesterday, I chilled for about exactly an hour. They were spot on.
Wonderful.
I just saved back a little bit so that we could cut those today. So it's not necessary, but again, when you're busy, if you want to make these up the night before, throw that in the fridge and just bake them off quickly the next day. That works well. You can't over chill them, but you can definitely under chill them. So very important. So you'll see that the dough now is very firm, holds its shape very easily. You can take a knife, you can take a scoop, depending on what size you want to make these, and you're just going to sort of roll them a little bit, form them. You want to bake these on a parchment-lined cookie sheet. We like to do that anyway, just saves a little bit of mess. But since these do come out very golden on the bottom, that parchment kind of creates that buffer, and so it keeps them from getting overly browned on the bottom. Keeps them nice and even. So just kind of make some even size pieces. And then what I did on mine was I took some pecan halves and I placed another pecan half in the middle. You could put a couple pieces on there. You'll see these do spread. Again, that's the purpose of us adding that baking powder, soda, cornstarch mixtures. We want them to spread, we want them to crisp, but we still want them to be chewy in the middle. When it comes to the baking time, I actually did a couple trays differently so you would be able to see. This is kind of preference. If you like a little bit darker, more crisp cookie, you can bake them the full 13 minutes. But if you like them a little bit less so, these baked for about 11. The bottoms are both really nice and
they look great.
Golden, little bit crisp, and even our one that we baked a little bit longer, really soft and chewy in the middle. So you can see that it's those ingredients in there that keep that soft, chewy center to them. We created almost a cake flour that we used for it. So it's really your preference on how long you bake them, but just keep that in mind. You can short them a little bit.
Okay.
They're gonna come out kind of puffy, and then they will settle as they cool.
Yeah, these are pretty flat.
Yeah, and then they will be a little bit less shiny in the middle when they're done. So again, I hate to say you can't over bake them, because you can,
yes,
of course.
But it's really preference.
Exactly.
For the most part.
So don't be afraid to pull them out a little bit early or leave them in there a little bit longer if that's what you like.
All right, wonderful. Well, as always, Lori, thank you so much for sharing another wonderful recipe. These look absolutely delicious. Stick around. Chris is back with weather right after this.